After the day, every trace of trust was broken. I once believed silence could heal everything, but silence only lets the darkness spread, touching people who never deserved it. And when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't save me. It only showed me who I had hurt. I stood before the showroom glass, watching my reflection stare back like an accusation. Josh had vanished since that day, leaving a space everyone avoided mentioning. A space not of an employee, but of a human being who once believed Redwood still held something good. I whispered, sometimes the truth doesn't save us. It only brings us back to where we broke a heart. This is Undercover Stories. Secrets. Stories. Transformations. If you believe broken people still deserve another chance, like, share, and stay until the end. Because Josh will return, but not in the way anyone ever expected. The HR system opened before me like an empty room, cold and silent. Josh's name was still there, but everything else was gone. No new job applications, no loan requests, no bank activity was large enough to say he was starting over. Just absence. The absence of someone who once believed he belonged here, then vanished from every trace of the world. I pulled the chair closer, rereading every line, hoping something had been left behind, but nothing appeared, only that frightening silence. A long pause. Then the door behind me opened. Dalton stood there, hands gripping a stack of papers, eyes refusing to look up. I asked if he knew anything, and he only nodded softly. He used to say this place was family. Being fired was the final hit. His voice trembled like he feared his own words. I stayed quiet, and inside that quiet, I heard myself breaking. Tommy walked by, catching part of the conversation. He lowered his head, speaking so softly he was almost not there. I think he's somewhere downtown, but people say he's not the same. I turned to him. Not the same? What does that mean? Tommy swallowed hard before answering. He avoids people, avoids talking, avoids his old life, like he believes no one wants to hear his voice anymore. I reopened Josh's performance review, the one Cliff had forged earlier. Every line was a needle straight into my chest. Josh had tried to tell the truth, but was turned into a failure. I stared at the manager's signature, then at mine at the bottom of the page. Signed on a rushed day when I hadn't bothered to check anything. Each signature felt like another blade cutting into what Josh once believed about me. I set the paper down, but it didn't want to leave my hand, as if it needed to remind me my silence had pushed a decent man into the darkest place of his life. I stood up and walked past the long row of desks, where everyone quietly avoided my eyes. No one wanted to mention Josh. No one wanted to mention the day he was thrown out like a liar. I understood that feeling, because even I wasn't sure I dared to face the whole truth. But I had no choice anymore. I returned to the office, grabbed my car keys. No announcements, no security call, no message to the new manager. Just me, and a vague map of the places Josh might be wandering somewhere in the city. I stepped outside, feeling like I had just taken off the role of CEO and turned into a man searching for his own mistakes. The wind cut across the front lot, cold enough to wake me fully. I whispered, almost like a confession to the sky. Josh, I'll find you, wherever you are. And I knew this journey wasn't only about finding Josh. It was about finding the part of myself I lost the day he disappeared from Redwood Motors. I left the spotless glass of Redwood behind, driving toward the neighborhood Tommy mentioned, where the pavement cracked like forgotten stories. A small repair shop appeared at the corner, its peeling sign barely holding a few letters, like a life slowly torn apart by the wind. I stepped inside, the smell of old motor oil rising sharply, a familiar scent Josh once called the smell of honest machines. The old shop owner looked up, eyes faded, but voice steady. I remember him. He asked to work for free, just to feel he still had worth. I stood silent, unsure how to answer. He pointed toward the wall beside the tool bench. A small piece of paper was taped there with brittle yellowing tape, the handwriting slightly slanted. Honesty keeps engines alive. I recognized that handwriting instantly. It was Josh. The shop owner watched me a little longer, then lowered his voice. He left a few weeks ago. Said nothing. Just left that rag and, thank you. I turned toward the workbench. The cleaning rag lay there, soaked in dark oil, so worn it barely had a color left. I picked it up, and in that moment, my chest tightened, not because of the rag, but because I understood. Josh hadn't just lost a job. He had lost himself, lost the belief that once held him upright on his hardest days. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them with a different resolve. I knew this journey had just crossed into a deeper darkness, and I had to follow it to the end. Because if I couldn't find Josh here, he might have fallen into an even darker corner of the city. I walked toward the door, the rag still in my hand, like a reminder that every mistake has a real heart behind it, and I couldn't let another day pass without reaching for that heart. I drove to Josh's old home, the place that once held the laughter of a small family he was so proud of. The street outside was strangely quiet, as if the whole neighborhood knew something had broken inside that house. I stepped onto the porch and knocked gently. The door opened with just a soft push. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9, looked up at me, her eyes wide and bright, then stopped at the Redwood logo on my shirt. She asked in the smallest voice, "You're from the place that made Dad sad." The question was as light as a whisper, yet it hit me like a blow straight to the chest. Before I could answer, Josh's mother appeared behind her. Her face was tired, her eyes swollen as if she had cried through too many nights. I apologized, but she only shook her head, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. Josh didn't lose a job. He lost his faith." She invited me in, and I stepped into a living room so quiet I could hear the slow tick of the clock. She said Josh once believed honesty was the strongest thing a person could hold. He thought telling the truth could fix anything, even other people. But when he was fired for something he didn't do, something inside him went silent. She said that day, Josh came home unable to lift his head for his daughter. He closed the bedroom door, sat there for hours without a word, and in the days after, he disappeared for long stretches. No explanations, no eye contact, as if he were sinking into a place where no light existed. Josh's mother placed a hand over her chest, as if she was holding something from breaking further. The last time I saw him, he said, "I'm just noise they wanted to mute." Hearing that felt like watching a man break apart inside the very value he believed defined him. I sat there in silence, unable to find a single word strong enough to repair what trust had been washed away. The little girl stepped closer, holding a small notebook with both hands. The cover was worn, the corners slightly bent. She whispered, "Dad said, if someday someone cares, show them this." I took the notebook from her tiny hands, feeling like I was holding a piece of Josh's heart, a part he left behind, afraid no one wanted to hear his voice anymore, and I understood. This journey was no longer about fixing a mistake inside a company. It was about saving the faith of a man who once believed in me, more than I ever believed in myself. I opened the notebook on the old couch in the living room. Both Josh's mother and his daughter are watching every page turn. The first lines made my hand stop cold. Josh had written down every customer complaint, every small detail, every word the Redwood system had quietly erased as if it never existed. Each page felt like a candle lit for a buried truth. Some customers said they were charged strange fees. Some said the final price didn't match the one they were promised. Some wrote that Redwood felt like a place avoiding its own reflection, and Josh had written all of it in neat, patient handwriting, like a man trying to preserve the soul of the place he worked for. I turned deeper into the notebook. On pages lightly stained with oil were notes he wrote for Cliff. Customer number 142, added fee with no explanation. System changed final price in 3 consecutive transactions. Needs checking. One customer said they won't return. Please review. Every note had been sent up, but next to each one Josh had written in red ink, "No reply. Not forwarded. Ignored." My heart sank, like a wire pulled too tight, finally snapping. Josh wasn't silent. Josh tried. Redwood simply refused to listen. I stopped at a page with its corner folded, the cover slightly worn. I opened it. The first sentence crushed my chest. Ethan once promised, "No hidden fees." I wanted to believe that. So I told the truth. But telling the truth got me fired. I read it again. And again. As if my mind refused to accept that a sentence I spoke years ago had become the knot that strangled a man's entire career. I remembered saying those words in my first meeting after becoming CEO. I remembered the look in the employees' eyes. Trust, excitement, hope that we would be different. And Josh believed that longer than anyone. The little girl looked at me, waiting for something. Josh's mother clasped her hands together, holding a pain that had lived too long. I couldn't speak, not a single word. I just stood there, frozen. As the pages in my hands revealed a truth I had never been ready to face. Josh didn't fight Redwood. Josh tried to save Redwood. With everything he had, and the price he received, was silence. A termination notice. A door slammed shut on the only person brave enough to speak the truth when no one wanted to hear it. I gripped the notebook tighter, feeling like I was holding the heart of someone abandoned. And I understood. Everything I did from this point on wasn't just about fixing mistakes. It was about giving Josh back what he had tried to keep alive for all of us. A Redwood that didn't deceive customers, didn't deceive itself. I looked up, my voice trembling under the weight. Josh, you tried to save us, even when we didn't deserve it. And in that moment, I knew this journey had shifted into a steeper path, where the truth was no longer a burden, but a reminder of the only person brave enough to speak what was right. Right before we silenced him, the little girl moved closer, fingers holding the edge of her shirt, and whispered, "Dad likes the soup at the small place down the street. He sits by the window every day." That sentence felt like a thin thread, pulling me deeper into the maze Josh had left behind. I looked once more at the notebook in my hand, then thanked them both and stepped out of a home that had lost its laughter far too long ago. I reached the soup shop as the day leaned into evening, the steam from the broth rising gently, mixing with the soft sound of spoons meeting bowls. The place was small but warm, the kind of warmth people seek when they're lost, just to breathe again. I looked around, and my eyes settled on the table by the window. The chair was slightly pushed back, as if someone had just left, but the seat still held the faint warmth of presence. I walked to it, placing my hand on the back of the chair, touching a version of Josh who had once sat here with shoulders too heavy for his age. The shop owner came over, a man with silvering hair, a gentle face, and eyes deep enough to hold many stories. He asked what I wanted to order, but when he saw the Redwood logo on my shirt, his gaze dimmed. He was a good man, but his eyes looked sad, like someone carrying another person's sins. I stared at him, unable to offer anything more than a silent apology. Josh had come here, carrying a sorrow that wasn't his, and I had let that happen. I asked if Josh had left anything behind. The owner walked to the counter, opened a small wooden drawer, and took out a folded receipt, its edges slightly worn. He handed it to me, as if returning evidence of a soul trying to stay upright. I unfolded it, only one line written. Today I almost said something. Then I remembered what it cost me last time. I read it slowly, each word pressing into me like a hand gripping my chest. Josh had almost spoken up, almost stood again. But the old wound was too deep. So he swallowed the truth even when it was choking him. I asked the owner if he knew where Josh went. He shook his head. But from the far corner, a young employee looked up. He hesitated, then walked toward me, voice barely above a breath. He's been sleeping at the shelter near the river, probably still there. I stood still for a few seconds, letting that sentence fall into the place in my heart reserved for truths that hurt the most. The shelter by the river, where people with nowhere left to stand gather under dim yellow lights, trying to survive one more night. I thanked them and stepped out of the shop. The evening wind pressed cold against my chest, a reminder of how far someone must fall before choosing a shelter. And Josh, the man who believed in truth even more than himself, had ended up there. I tightened my grip on the receipt, then looked toward the road leading down to the river. I knew. The moment I found Josh was getting close, and I was afraid. Afraid that what I would see might hurt even more than everything I had read in that notebook. But I walked anyway, because sometimes the only way to fix a mistake, it is to face it all the way to the end. I found the shelter when the sky had fallen to a shade where only a small window spilled yellow light into the dark. The line of people stretched all the way to the corner. Each face carries a story no one has asked about. I walked inside, no longer carrying the posture of a CEO, only the shape of a man searching for the part of himself he had lost. No one noticed me. No one needed to. In places like this, everyone is trying to hide their own pain. I looked down the row of seats. Old jackets, torn backpacks, eyes that had once been bright but dimmed because life had stopped making room for them. Then I saw him, sitting at the end of the row, head slightly bowed, hands on his knees as if holding himself together. Josh had grown thinner. His eyes were hollow, as if missing many nights of sleep, or missing a place to belong. I walked toward him slowly, each step swallowing the beat of my heart. I stopped right in front of him. Josh didn't look up. He just stared at a pair of shoes so worn their original color was gone. I took a deep breath. "It's me, Ethan." My voice was barely enough to fill the space between us. Josh still didn't look. He shook his head gently, like brushing away a ghost. "Ethan Cole doesn't come to places like this." The words were soft but sharp, cutting straight through everything I had tried to avoid. I sat down, lowering myself to his eye level. "I failed you, Josh, and I failed the company. I'm here to fix what I broke." The words came out like a confession. No polish, no excuse. Josh laughed, but not the kind of laugh that finds release. It was the laugh of someone who had let go of himself. He spoke slowly, voice rough and tired. "You can't fix people you break." I didn't argue, because he wasn't wrong. I simply reached into my jacket and pulled out the notebook, the one worn at the corners, the one his daughter had given me. I placed it in his hands, and in that moment, he froze. His fingers trembled slightly as they touched the cover. He opened the first page, then the next. Then the pages filled with the words he wrote in the days he tried to keep Redwood alive with the truth. I saw his shoulders shake, not from the cold, but from memories being peeled back in front of him. He stopped at the last page. The page with the sentence I had read so many times felt carved into my chest. Josh stared at it for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he lifted his eyes to mine. There was still darkness there, but inside the darkness, a tiny spark remained, like an ember refusing to die. He whispered, voice tight but steady. "You read all of it?" I nodded. Every word. That moment wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. Just two people sitting in a worn-down shelter, sharing a truth buried far too long. But for Josh, and for me, it was a beginning. A sliver of light breaking through the fractures in both of us. A sign that this journey still held hope. And I knew. From the second he looked up, the story had entered its next rise, its next turning point. Josh sat still for a long time. His hand was resting on the notebook as if it would disappear the moment he let go. I looked at him, then asked a question I wasn't sure I dared to hear the answer to. "Why did you try so hard to save the place that hurt you?" Josh closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them with a gaze deep as dark water. "Because I believed in your father's rule. A name is a signature. I wanted that signature to stay clean." His voice was tired, but every word held the same straight honesty that made me feel smaller than ever. I told him Redwood needed him, that we wanted him back. But Josh shook his head, soft, yet enough to dim the entire room. "I'm not the person you fired. That man had faith." The words tightened in my throat, because I knew. The man Josh spoke of was the best version of himself, the version that believed truth could win against anything, the version who believed I and Redwood were still clean. I leaned toward him. My voice was slow and steady, like a promise I could no longer afford to break. I didn't come to find the salesman. I came to find the man who kept my promise. Even when I forgot it, Josh opened his eyes slowly, as if every sentence I spoke was pulling him back from somewhere deep, a place filled with darkness, disappointment, and nights when he believed the world no longer needed his voice. He looked at me, his lips trembling. "Ethan, I used to believe in you, really believe so much that I thought telling the truth would make Redwood right again." He paused, taking a breath like someone opening a long-shut door. "But when you signed my termination, I thought, maybe I believed in the wrong person." I lowered my head. That mistake needed no reminder. It was already heavy enough to blur everything good I'd tried to build. I whispered, "Josh, I can't go back and protect you from what happened, but I can start from this moment to make sure I never hurt you again." The shelter fell silent, as if it held its breath with me. Josh placed the notebook on his lap, rested his hand on it, and for the first time since I found him, he cried, not loudly. Just a few drops falling onto the oil-stained page, but to me, it was the moment a soul tried to find its way back. Through shaking breaths, he said, "Ethan, I still want to believe in something. I just don't know if I can believe in anyone anymore." I placed my hand on his shoulder, not pushing, not urging. "Let me be the one who has to prove it, not with words, with action." Josh wiped his tears, took a slow breath, and in those eyes, fragile yet fierce, I saw something I thought I had lost long ago, a remaining piece of faith, a small spark, but enough to open the next rise of this story, where he and I would face Redwood together, and the final truth waiting ahead. I guided Josh out of the shelter as the sky faded into a pale gray. The kind of afternoon, unsure if it wanted to end or hold on a little longer, he walked slowly, as if each step needed proof that the ground beneath him was real and not another corner of the dream he'd grown used to drowning in. I said nothing. Some silences aren't avoidance. They're the space someone needs to breathe in their own rhythm again. The car stopped in front of Josh's house. The old wooden door still carried the ink marks his little girl had drawn years ago. Josh stood at the steps for a long time, as if crossing that threshold might shatter something fragile that had kept this family standing while he was gone. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to walk in alone." Josh swallowed a trembling breath, then nodded. The door opened. His daughter stood there. Her eyes lit up for a heartbeat, then filled with tears before the next breath. "Dad." Her voice cracked like a violin string pulled too tight for too long. Josh dropped to his knees, and she ran into him, wrapping her arms tight around his neck. "You said you'd come back when the world got better. You did it." Watching them, it felt like the whole neighborhood had regained a piece of light that disappeared the day Josh walked away. His wife stepped into the doorway. Her hand covered her mouth when she saw him. No anger, no questions. Just the red eyes of someone who had carried a fear big enough to turn into a shadow inside her own home. Josh stood, walked toward her, then stopped. She looked at him for a long moment before pulling him into her arms. I turned away, giving them the space to stitch themselves back together after too much silence. After a while, they stepped outside where I was waiting. The little girl held Josh's hand with both of hers, as if letting go might lose him again. I looked at them, then spoke slowly, each word meant to be a promise. "No one here will ever be silenced again. I promise your family that." Josh's wife looked at me, not fully believing, but no longer hopeless either. Josh looked down, then up at me. His eyes were no longer the solid darkness I'd seen the night before. There was a thin line of light, small, but real. I asked if he was ready to return to Redwood. Josh stayed quiet for a long time. He looked at his family, at the notebook still in my hand, then toward the car, as if staring at a past that had once broken him. Finally, Josh took a deep breath. "I'll try." A simple sentence, but to me, it was the sound of a heart unlocking after being sealed shut by betrayal. I nodded, soft but certain, because from that moment on, the journey of healing was no longer something Josh had to walk alone. And I knew the next part of this story would test both of us even more. But once a person begins to return to themselves, the rest is learning how to hold that fragile faith steady. Day after day, the next morning, Josh and I walked into the showroom together. The glass door pushed open, and every sound in the room nearly disappeared. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Footsteps stopped halfway across the floor. Every pair of eyes turned toward Josh, not with curiosity, but with the disbelief of people who never thought they'd see him return after everything. Josh stood beside me, his shoulders slightly tense, but he didn't lower them any more. I saw his hand tremble, then steady itself as he forced his stance upright. Ava reacted first. She dropped the stack of papers she was holding and ran to him, hugging Josh like someone hugging a person they thought they had lost forever. "We thought you wouldn't want to see us again." Josh paused for a heartbeat, then lifted his arm to hug her back, gentle but real. "I didn't, until someone reminded me why I spoke up the first time." His voice was low, a little hoarse, but each word fell onto the showroom floor like it pulled everyone from shock into emotion. Dalton stepped forward from the back. He stared at Josh for a long moment, as if checking whether the person in front of him was truly real or just a memory returning in the shape of a man. Then Dalton handed him an old detailing rag, the same one Josh used to keep in his desk drawer. "We're not done yet." Josh looked at the rag, and a small smile flickered across his eyes, the smile of someone finding the last missing piece of himself. "Yeah, I know." But not everyone was happy. In the corner, the new management team whispered among themselves. One of them spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "He's going to mess everything up." I turned toward them, not angry, not loud, just the look of someone who had finally faced the truth and would not avoid it again. "No, he's going to teach us how to do things right." The entire showroom fell silent, not the silence of fear, but the silence of people witnessing the moment a man was once pushed out of these doors, walked back in as a reminder that dignity never fails when someone chooses to defend it. Josh stood straighter. He looked around, meeting every gaze without flinching. And in that moment, I knew everyone felt what I felt, not the return of a former employee, but the return of a voice once silenced, now given the chance to rise again. A new peak was waiting ahead. Not just for Josh, but for all of Redwood Motors, because from that moment on, no one doubted that the truth would walk into every room with us, no matter how deep into the dark it had been thrown before. I led Josh into the small office beside the main lobby, where the afternoon light brushed the wall as if opening a path for a different beginning. On the desk was a new nameplate. The metal surface caught a soft shine when I slid it toward him. Customer advocate, voice of Redwood. Josh stared at the words for a long time, as if unsure they truly belonged to him. His hand trembled when he touched the edge of the plate. "You really trust me with this?" I nodded, without a trace of hesitation. "You were the only one we all should have trusted." Josh lowered his head, taking a long breath, as if pulling back the air he had been missing for far too long. Then he stepped out of the office, carrying a role no one else could have carried better. I watched him go, his back straighter, his steps steadier, as if the weight that once crushed him had finally lifted. A few days later, the atmosphere in the showroom began to shift. Bit by bit, Josh stood before the team during the first training session. His voice was low and calm, but every word struck like a turning wheel in a new machine. "Speak the truth, even when it's hard to hear." Everyone listened. No one looked down. No one avoided the moment. They looked at Josh the way people look at a mirror polished by scars that can no longer be hidden. A young employee raised his hand, telling a story about a customer complaint he had been too afraid to report under the old management. Josh nodded. "You did the right thing today." Another employee shared a moment when she saw a suspicious fee but had been told not to enter it into the system. Josh said, "You kept our promise to our customers." And those stories, instead of being buried, were finally heard, acknowledged, and corrected at the root. One afternoon, I was standing at the reception desk when an old customer walked in, a man who once left Redwood in silence. He carried disappointed eyes as he stepped through our doors. He looked around, then gave a small, quiet smile. "I left because the place felt scared. Today, it feels honest again." I couldn't find words. I just smiled and bowed my head in thanks, because sometimes a simple sentence is enough proof that all the effort is finally moving in the right direction. Josh was standing across the room, but I saw his eyes brighten just a little when he heard those words. His faith wasn't returning in a single day, but it was returning drop by drop, like light slipping through the cracks of something once broken. And I knew this moment wasn't just the rebirth of Josh. It was the rebirth of Redwood itself, beginning with one man who had once been shattered, but still chose to stand again with the truth. Some people seem completely broken, yet they become the very reason a company can stand again. I watched Josh in the middle of the showroom lobby. His eyes were calmer than the night I found him at the shelter, and I understood. Sometimes what we lose isn't a job. It's the belief that we still matter. And that belief, if someone lifts it at the right moment, it can save an entire life. I spoke softly, almost to myself, that no one is born to stay silent forever, that every small voice can pull an entire place back toward what's right. And if you've stayed with us this far, maybe you believe it too. That courage often begins with the people who looked weakest to the world. If this story touched you, leave a heart in the comments and subscribe to see the final chapter where every last secret finally steps into the light. Secrets, stories, transformations, and sometimes belief is the thing that heals everything.